Have you ever had one of those moments that completely changes how you see someone? I mean, one minute you think you know exactly who a person is, and the next, everything you thought you understood is turned upside down. That's exactly what happened to me with Alex, my supposedly straight coworker. I'm Jamie, by the way, and I work at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. Our office is one of those modern open-concept spaces where privacy is basically non-existent, but somehow connections still manage to form in the most unexpected ways. I've been with the company for about 3 years now, and I've always been open about my sexuality. It's not something I broadcast, but I don't hide it either. Most of my coworkers know, and it's never been an issue. Alex joined our team about 8 months ago. When we first met, I immediately noticed how attractive they were, tall, with these incredible hazel eyes that seemed to change color depending on the lighting, and a smile that could honestly light up our entire office floor. But I also quickly filed them under straight and unavailable in my mental Rolodex. Alex occasionally mentioned dating experiences with people of the opposite gender, had photos of past relationships on their desk, and generally gave off that unmistakable straight vibe that my gaydar has become pretty accurate at detecting over the years. Or so I thought. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story about attraction or misread signals. It's about those moments when someone surprises you so completely that it forces you to question your assumptions about people and the boxes we put them in. This experience changed how I think about workplace relationships, about sexuality, and about the subtle ways we communicate interest to one another. And I think there's something valuable here for anyone who's ever misread a situation or been surprised by feelings they didn't expect. Our daily interactions at work started off professionally enough. Alex and I were assigned to the same project team shortly after they started, which meant we spent a lot of time brainstorming together. At first, our conversations were strictly work-related, but gradually, as we got to know each other better, we developed this easy rapport. Alex had this way of building on my ideas that made me feel valued, and I found myself looking forward to our meetings more than I probably should have. There was this one afternoon when we were the only two left in the conference room after everyone else had gone home. We'd been struggling with a particularly challenging client brief, and somehow the conversation shifted from marketing strategies to our personal lives. Alex told me about growing up in a small town, about coming to the city for college and never looking back. There was something in the way they described feeling constrained by their hometown that resonated with me. When I shared my own coming out story, I noticed Alex listening with this intense focus, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than just polite curiosity. Looking back, I can see the subtle hints that maybe things weren't exactly as straightforward as I'd assumed. There were the lingering glances across the office that lasted just a beat too long to be casual. The way Alex would find reasons to stop by my desk, even when we weren't working on the same projects. The coffee they'd bring me in the mornings, always remembering exactly how I liked it. Oat milk, no sugar, with just a hint of cinnamon. At the time, I chalked it all up to friendly collegiality, maybe a workplace friendship developing. I didn't want to be that person who mistakes kindness for interest, but there was also this growing tension between us that was becoming harder to ignore. Sometimes our hands would brush when we were both reaching for the same document, and I swear I could feel this electric current pass between us. Or we'd find ourselves standing just a little too close during office parties, gravitating toward each other even in crowded rooms. I started to notice how Alex would laugh a little too hard at my jokes, even the terrible ones that made everyone else groan. Internally, I was a mess of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I was definitely attracted to Alex. Who wouldn't be? They were smart, funny, kind, and yes, incredibly good-looking. But on the other hand, I had this firm rule about not developing feelings for straight coworkers. That road led nowhere good, in my experience. So I tried to keep my feelings in check, to maintain professional boundaries while still enjoying our growing friendship. I also couldn't help questioning what I thought I knew about Alex's sexuality. Was I misreading signals because I wanted them to be interested? Was I projecting my own attraction onto innocent friendly gestures? The last thing I wanted was to make Alex uncomfortable or jeopardize our working relationship by misinterpreting their intentions. So I kept my thoughts to myself, convinced that whatever I was feeling was one-sided. The night everything changed started out ordinarily enough. Our team had just successfully pitched a major campaign to a new client, and everyone was riding high on the victory. We decided to go out for celebratory drinks at this bar near the office. It was one of those perfect early autumn evenings, warm enough that you didn't need a jacket, but with just enough crispness in the air to remind you that summer was fading. The kind of night that feels full of possibilities. The team celebration was lively, with rounds of drinks and toasts to our success. I noticed that Alex seemed to be sticking close to me all evening, our conversations feeling more intimate despite the noisy bar around us. When people started heading home around midnight, Alex casually mentioned that they lived in my neighborhood and suggested we share a ride. But when the Uber arrived, Alex proposed walking instead. It was only about 20 minutes, and the night was so beautiful. Something about the way they suggested it made my heart beat a little faster, but I told myself not to read too much into it. Let me tell you about that walk home, because every detail of it is etched into my memory. The city was quieter than usual, with just the occasional car passing by and the distant sounds of music from bars we passed. We walked side by side, our conversation flowing easily from work to movies to childhood memories. There was something magical about seeing Alex outside the context of our office. They seemed more relaxed, more authentic somehow. The streetlights cast this golden glow that made everything feel slightly dreamlike. We were talking about our favorite books when we reached this narrow section of sidewalk where a construction barrier forced us to walk single file. Alex went ahead, then turned back to make sure I was following. That's when it happened. As I moved to squeeze past the barrier, Alex reached back and caught my belt loop with their finger, gently tugging me forward. It wasn't a casual gesture. There was intention behind it, a deliberateness that made my breath catch. And instead of letting go once I was through, Alex's finger stayed hooked in my belt loop as we continued walking, creating this physical connection between us that felt incredibly intimate. I remember feeling like time had slowed down. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure Alex could hear it. The simple touch of their finger on my belt loop felt more charged than any kiss I'd ever experienced. It was this perfect mixture of playful and possessive, casual yet unmistakably deliberate. I looked up to find Alex watching my reaction, those hazel eyes searching my face with an intensity that left no doubt about what was happening. "Is this okay?" Alex asked softly, their voice barely above a whisper. The vulnerability in that question nearly undid me. This wasn't the confident coworker I knew from the office. This was someone taking a risk, stepping into uncertain territory. "More than okay," I managed to reply, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. And then we were just standing there on the sidewalk, the city continuing around us while we existed in our own little bubble of possibility. Alex's finger was still hooked in my belt loop, creating this tether between us that neither of us seemed willing to break. The physical implications of that gesture were obvious. It was clearly flirtatious, clearly crossing the line from friendly to something more. But it was the emotional implications that really floored me. This wasn't just about attraction. It was about trust, about Alex feeling safe enough with me to express something they perhaps hadn't fully acknowledged to themselves yet. And there was something incredibly powerful about the fact that they had chosen such a subtle gesture, not a grand declaration or a dramatic move, but this small, intimate connection that left room for interpretation if needed. My reaction was a jumble of surprise, exhilaration, and confusion. Part of me wanted to turn and kiss Alex right there on the street, to transform this moment of potential into something definitive. But another part was cautious, aware that we worked together, that this could complicate things in ways neither of us might be prepared for. And underlying it all was this persistent question: had I been wrong about Alex all this time? Was this a recent realization for them, or something they'd been wrestling with for longer? Alex's response to my acceptance was this slow, beautiful smile that transformed their entire face. They gently tugged on my belt loop again, pulling me just a fraction closer. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," they admitted, and the honesty in their voice made something flutter in my chest. "I just wasn't sure how you'd react." We stood there for what felt like forever, this new understanding blossoming between us. Eventually, we started walking again, but everything had shifted. Our hands brushed against each other, fingers tentatively intertwining. The conversation became more personal, punctuated by these loaded silences that said more than words could. By the time we reached my apartment building, it felt like we'd crossed some invisible threshold together. Standing at my door, neither of us seemed to know quite what to do next. The moment was fragile, balanced on the edge of something new and uncertain. Alex reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, their touch feather-light. "I should probably go," they said, though everything in their body language suggested they wanted to stay. "We have that 9 a.m. meeting tomorrow." The mention of work brought reality crashing back. Tomorrow we would be co-workers again, sitting across from each other in a professional setting. How would this new awareness between us change our workplace dynamic? Would Alex regret this moment of vulnerability in the harsh light of day? "Alex," I said, needing to understand before we parted. "What does this mean? For you, I mean. I thought you were straight." They finished my sentence with a small laugh that held no humor. "Yeah, so did I, for a long time. But I'm starting to think maybe it's not that simple." The honesty in that statement was breathtaking. "I don't have all the answers, Jamie. I just know that being around you makes me feel something I can't ignore anymore." With that, they leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek, lingering just long enough to make my heart race before stepping back. "Good night," they said, and then they were walking away, leaving me standing at my door with my fingers pressed to the spot where their lips had been. That night was one of the longest of my life. I replayed every moment of our walk home, analyzing each word, each gesture. I thought about all our previous interactions in this new light, wondering how I could have missed the signs. Or had there been a shift in Alex that I couldn't have detected? I vacillated between excitement about what might happen next and anxiety about how this would affect our working relationship. What if this was just a momentary impulse for Alex, a curiosity they'd satisfy and then regret? What if word got around the office and created awkwardness for both of us? But underlying all these concerns was an undeniable thrill. That moment when Alex caught my belt loop had awakened something in me that I couldn't simply put back to sleep. Whatever happened next, I knew things between us had fundamentally changed. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, my stomach in knots. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would Alex be distant? Regretful? Would they pretend nothing had happened? I settled at my desk with a coffee I could barely taste, trying to focus on my email while actually watching the elevator doors from the corner of my eye. When Alex finally arrived, they paused just inside the office, scanning the room until their eyes landed on me. And then they smiled, this small, private smile that immediately eased the tension in my shoulders. They walked directly to my desk, set down a coffee cup, oat milk, no sugar, hint of cinnamon, and said, "Good morning," in a voice that somehow conveyed everything and nothing at the same time. "Morning," I replied, accepting the coffee with a gratitude that went beyond the beverage itself. This simple gesture told me that whatever had happened between us wasn't something Alex was running from. "Sleep well?" "Not really," they admitted, leaning against my desk in a way that felt both casual and intimate. Had a lot on my mind. The look they gave me left no doubt about what, or who, had been occupying their thoughts. Our morning meeting should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. We sat across from each other at the conference table, contributing professionally to the discussion while exchanging these loaded glances that no one else seemed to notice. There was a new awareness between us, a current of understanding that made every interaction feel charged with possibility. Alex found reasons to brush their hand against mine when passing documents, to lean in close when making a point. Each touch felt deliberate, a continuation of what had started with that belt loop the night before. Over the next few days, we fell into this strange new dynamic, professional colleagues in public settings, but something much more complicated when we found moments alone. We'd stay late at the office, ostensibly to work on projects, but really to have the space to talk without prying eyes. Alex opened up about their confusion regarding their sexuality, how they'd always identified as straight, but had begun questioning that identity over the past few months. "It's not that I've never been attracted to men before," they explained during one of our late-night conversations. "It's more that I never let myself fully acknowledge it. It was easier to focus on my attractions to women because that's what everyone expected." The vulnerability in their voice as they shared this made my heart ache. I knew all too well how difficult it could be to question something so fundamental about yourself, especially when you've built your identity around a particular understanding of who you are. For my part, I shared my own journey, the messiness and confusion of coming to terms with my sexuality. I told Alex about my first crush on a girl in high school, about coming out to my parents in college, about the relationships that had shaped my understanding of myself. It felt important to be honest about the challenges as well as the joys, to make space for whatever Alex was feeling without pressure or expectation. The question of what to do about our growing feelings became increasingly urgent. We worked together, which complicated things enormously. Office relationships were not explicitly forbidden by company policy, but they were generally discouraged, especially between people who worked closely together. And then there was the fact that Alex was still figuring things out. Was it fair to either of us to start something when they were still in this process of discovery? After about 2 weeks of this limbo, the lingering touches, the loaded conversations, the tension that built whenever we were alone together, I decided we needed to have a real conversation about where things stood. I suggested we meet somewhere neutral, away from both the office and our apartments, somewhere we could talk honestly without the pressure of what might happen next. We met at this quiet cafe in a neighborhood neither of us frequented, a place where we were unlikely to run into colleagues or friends. Alex was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of tea waiting. They looked nervous but determined, which somehow calmed my own anxiety. Whatever happened, we were going to face it together. So, I said after we'd exchanged somewhat awkward greetings, I think we should talk about what's happening between us. Alex nodded, their fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. I've been thinking about nothing else, they admitted. About that night, about what it means, about what I want. They looked up at me then, their gaze direct and unflinching. The thing is, Jamie, I don't have all the answers. I can't tell you exactly what this means for my identity or how to label what I'm feeling. But I do know that what's happening between us is real, and it's not something I want to walk away from just because it's complicated. The honesty in their words touched something deep inside me. I don't need you to have all the answers, I told them, reaching across the table to cover their hand with mine. Identity is fluid, and labels don't always capture the complexity of what we feel. What I do need is to know that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and regret this, or decide it was just an experiment. That's not what this is, Alex said firmly, turning their hand to intertwine our fingers. I've been attracted to you since the day we met. I just didn't know how to process it at first. This isn't about curiosity or experimentation. It's about you, specifically, about how you make me feel. We talked for hours, working through our concerns about the workplace, about the potential for misunderstanding or judgment from others, about the risk we'd be taking. But underlying all these practical considerations was this undeniable pull between us, this connection that had started long before Alex caught my belt loop that night. In the end, we decided to take things slowly but intentionally. We would keep things professional at work while exploring our connection outside the office. We'd be discreet not out of shame, but out of a desire to protect this fragile new thing growing between us from outside pressures and expectations. And most importantly, we'd communicate honestly about our feelings, giving Alex the space to continue their journey of self-discovery while building something meaningful together. As we left the cafe that evening, Alex reached for my hand, their fingers finding mine with a certainty that belied all the uncertainty we'd just discussed. You know, they said, a smile playing at the corners of their mouth, I'm really glad I decided to catch your belt loop that night. Me too, I replied, squeezing their hand. Though I'm still curious, what made you take that risk? After all those months of just being colleagues? Alex thought for a moment before answering. I think I was tired of pretending, of acting like what I felt for you was just friendly or professional. And something about that night, being away from the office, seeing you in this different context, made me brave enough to show you what I was feeling instead of just telling you. That simple gesture, catching my belt loop and not letting go, had indeed communicated more than words could have in that moment. It had been playful yet intentional, subtle yet unmistakable. It had created a connection between us that words might have complicated or diminished. In the weeks that followed, our relationship evolved in ways both expected and surprising. There were awkward moments at work when we had to maintain professional distance despite wanting to be closer. There were beautiful discoveries as we learned each other's bodies and hearts. There were difficult conversations as Alex continued to process what this relationship meant for their understanding of themselves. But through it all, there was this thread of authenticity that made even the challenging moments feel worthwhile. Looking back now, I'm struck by how often we think we know people based on the labels they wear or the identities they claim. Alex had presented as straight, and I had accepted that presentation without question, filing away my attraction as inappropriate and impossible. How many connections do we miss because we make assumptions about who people are and what they want? How many possibilities do we foreclose before they've even had a chance to develop? What I've learned from this experience is that human attraction and identity are far more complex and fluid than the neat categories we try to place them in. That sometimes people are still discovering themselves, still figuring out the truth of who they are and what they want. And that sometimes it takes a single gesture, like catching someone's belt loop and not letting go, to create the space for that discovery to unfold. Alex and I are still writing our story together. We don't know exactly where it will lead or how to define what we have, but we've learned to embrace that ambiguity, to find joy in the journey rather than anxiety about the destination. And every time I feel Alex's finger hook through my belt loop, something that has become a private gesture of affection between us, I'm reminded of how a single moment of courage can change everything. So if there's someone in your life who makes you feel something unexpected, someone who challenges your assumptions about yourself or others, I encourage you to be open to that possibility. Not every connection will lead to romance, of course, and workplace relationships in particular require careful navigation. But being honest about your feelings, with yourself and eventually with others, creates the space for authentic connection, whatever form that might take. As for me and my supposedly straight coworker, we're taking it day by day, learning and growing together. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Total _char_count, 17,984.